The wind was a blade, sharp and cold, slicing through the streets of Bison Creek. It carried snow that didn't fall, but attacked, stinging Priscilla Turner's face like 1,000 angry needles. She pressed one hand to her belly, a great swollen drum, and clutched a leather satchel with the other. Everything she owned was in that bag. It was February 1878, the worst winter anyone could remember. And this blizzard was the devil himself, come to claim the territory. The innkeeper's words echoed in her mind, colder than the wind. You ain't welcome here no more. Unmarried, and with child. A scandal that couldn't be allowed to sleep under a decent roof. For 6 months she'd hidden her secret, her dresses getting looser, her movements more careful. But today, the pain had doubled her over right in the middle of the dinner service. The innkeeper's wife saw. And that was that. Out. Into the storm. Another contraction ripped through her, a hot, tearing fire in the frozen world. She gasped, collapsing against the wall of the general store. The town was a ghost. Dark windows stared back at her like empty eye sockets. No lights, no people. Just a desperate woman, dying in the snow. Lord, help me, she breathed, her words turning to ice in the air. She was only 22. She was supposed to be starting a new life out west, not ending it. The man who'd promised her marriage, the father of this child, had vanished with the first frost. He'd left her with nothing but shame and a baby that was trying to claw its way into a world that didn't want it. Another wave of pain hit, and she slid down the wall into a drift. This was it, the end. Then a voice cut through the howl of the wind. "Miss, are you all right?" A figure on horseback, a phantom in the swirling white. His face was covered by a bandana, a dark shape in the gloom. She tried to answer, but the pain stole her breath. He was off the horse in an instant, crouching beside her. He pulled down the bandana. His face was hard, carved by wind and sun, but his eyes were kind. He took in the whole situation in a single glance. Her belly, her torn dress, her despair. "You're in a bad way," he said. It wasn't a question. "Nowhere to go," she whispered, her voice a cracked thing. "They threw me out." She expected judgment, disgust. Instead, he just nodded. He took off his heavy duster coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was warm, smelling of pine and leather. "Name's Nathan Porter," he said. "Folks call me Nate." "Priscilla Turner," she managed. Then, without another word, he scooped her up into his arms. He was strong, frighteningly strong. "My cabin's not far," he said. "Can you hold on?" She could only nod against his chest, too broken to fight, too desperate to care if he was a savior or something much, much worse. He put her on his horse and mounted behind her, his arm a steel band around her waist. "I've got you," he murmured into her ear. And they rode into the white hell of the night. The world was a blur of snow and agony. Each contraction was a fresh wave of torture, but each time his arm tightened around her. He seemed to know, to feel it with her. She found herself leaning back into his strength, a strange comfort in the arms of this dangerous-looking stranger. Who was this man? Why would he stop for a woman like her? After an eternity, a light appeared through the trees. A cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, a promise of warmth. "Home," Nathan said. He carried her from the horse to the door, as if she weighed nothing. Inside, a fire blazed. The one-room cabin was simple, but clean and warm. A bed, a table, a stove. It was a sanctuary. Or a prison. He gently placed her on the bed, his coat still wrapped around her. "I'll see to my horse." As he went to the door, she found her voice. "Why are you helping me?" He paused, his hand on the latch. "My ma always said, you don't need a reason to help folks who need helping." And then he was gone, back into the storm. She was alone in his cabin, alone with his things. A rifle rested above the stone fireplace. A stack of books sat on a small table. But something else caught her eye. On a high shelf, tucked away, was a small carved wooden horse. It was worn smooth, as if held by a child's hand for years. Whose was it? Did he have a family? A child? Before she could think another thought, he was back, stomping snow from his boots. And as he closed the door, the worst contraction yet seized her, and a scream tore from her throat. "The baby's coming," she gasped. "It's coming now." If Nathan was scared, he didn't show it. He moved with a calm that was unnerving. He put water on to boil, gathered clean linens from a trunk. He rolled up his sleeves. "I've helped birth plenty of foals," he said, his voice steady. "My sister had 2 little ones. I was there for both." Was that the truth, or just a story to calm her? The next few hours were a nightmare. The blizzard shrieked outside, a monster trying to claw its way in. The pain was relentless. She was breaking apart. But Nathan was there. He wiped her brow. He held her hand. He spoke to her in a low, encouraging voice. "You're the strongest woman I ever met, Miss Turner," he told her as dawn bled gray light into the sky. Just a little more. With one final desperate push, her daughter entered the world. Nathan caught the wailing infant in his large, calloused hands. The tenderness in that moment brought tears to Priscilla's eyes. "A perfect little girl," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't place. He wrapped the baby in a blanket and placed her in Priscilla's arms. Exhausted, overwhelmed, Priscilla looked at her daughter's face. "Grace," she whispered. Nathan gave them a moment, then came back with a cup of tea. "Thank you," she said. The words felt small, useless. "No need," he replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You and the baby are welcome to stay, as long as you need." He was too good to be true, and in her experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. In the days that followed, the blizzard buried them. The world outside ceased to exist. It was just the 3 of them in that small, warm cabin. Priscilla learned about Nathan Porter. He'd come west after the war. He raised horses. He kept to himself. The people in town thought he was odd. A man his age, unmarried, happier with books and horses than people. He was perfect with Grace. He never hesitated to rock her, to hum soft tunes when she cried. One evening, he fashioned a tiny cradle from an old drawer. He handled the baby with a familiarity that was strange. It was more than just kindness. It was a memory, a painful one. One night, while he was outside chopping wood, she saw it again. The little carved horse on the shelf. Her curiosity was a physical ache. She had to know. She stood on a chair and reached for it. Behind the horse was something else. A small metal photograph. A tintype. Priscilla's blood ran cold. It was a picture of a woman, smiling and beautiful. Beside her stood a small boy, holding that very same wooden horse. Who were they? Where were they now? Was this kind stranger a widower, or something worse? The cabin door opened. Nathan stood there, his arms full of firewood. He saw the tintype in her hand, and the warmth in his eyes vanished. It was like watching a fire be smothered. His face became a mask of stone. The air in the cabin turned thick and cold. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said. His voice was no longer kind. It was flat, dangerous. Priscilla's heart hammered against her ribs. She clutched Grace, who was sleeping in her arms, like a shield. This was it. The kindness was an act. She had stumbled into the wolf's den after all. "Who are they?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He dropped the firewood into the box by the hearth with a crash that made her jump. He walked over to her, and for the first time, she was truly afraid of him. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just looked at the photo with an emptiness that was terrifying. "That was my wife, Sarah," he said, his voice like gravel. "And my son, Daniel." He said was. A story spilled out of him then, a torrent of old pain. They were traveling west, just like she had been. Starting a new life. They were ambushed on the trail by bandits. He was beaten, shot, and left for dead in a ditch. They took Sarah, and they took Daniel. He never saw them again. He spent a year tracking them, a ghost fueled by rage and grief. The trail led him here, to the Wyoming territory, and then it went cold. So he stayed. He bought this land. He built this cabin. He wasn't just a quiet horse breeder. He was a hunter. Waiting. He had been waiting for 3 years, for the men who had destroyed his life. He looked at Priscilla, at the baby in her arms, and she finally understood. When he found her in the snow, he hadn't just seen a stranger in trouble. He had seen a ghost of the family he'd lost. It wasn't just kindness that had made him stop. It was his own broken heart. This revelation changed everything. He wasn't a monster. He was a man in more pain than she could possibly imagine. But his past was not the past. It was a loaded gun, waiting to go off. And now she and Grace were standing right in front of it. "The man who led the gang," Nathan said, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. "The one who took them. He was a smooth talker, handsome, with eyes as cold as a snake's." He paused, his own eyes locking on hers. His name was Turner. The name hit her like a physical blow. Turner. Her name. The name she had just given the man in the snow. The name of Grace's father. It had to be a coincidence. It was a common name. It couldn't be. But the description, the charm that hid a chilling emptiness. She thought of Preston Turner, the man who had whispered promises to her in Denver. The man who had a smile that never reached his eyes. Her hands started to shake. "Tell me about him," Nathan said, his voice urgent. So she did. She told him everything. About Preston, the supposed businessman who had swept her off her feet. The promises of marriage. The way he disappeared the moment she told him she was pregnant. As she spoke, she watched Nathan's face harden, the lines around his eyes deepening. The hope he might have clung to for 3 years was dying right in front of her. His wife and child weren't just missing, they were gone. And the man responsible was the father of her own baby. "It's him," Nathan said, the words barely audible. "It's the same man." They stared at each other across the small cabin. Two strangers, brought together by a blizzard. Two victims, bound together by the same monster. The world had just shrunk to the size of this room, and the danger outside was no longer the snow. It was a man named Turner. If Preston ever found out about Grace, ever found out she existed, what would he do? "You have a choice," Nathan said, his voice regaining some of its strength. "I can give you money, enough to get you and Grace on a train. You can go to a new city, start over. He'll never find you." He paused, his gaze intense. "Or you can stay, here, with me." The unspoken words hung in the air. "Stay and fight." "Why would you do that?" she asked. "Why would you protect the child of the man who did that to you?" "Because she's not him," Nathan said, his eyes softening as he looked at the sleeping baby. "She's innocent, and he's not taking anything else from me." The offer was insane. To stay here, in the heart of the danger, with a man whose soul was consumed by revenge. But leaving felt even more dangerous. Out there, she would be alone. Here, she had him. A man who understood the darkness she was facing because he had been living in it for years. "What kind of man hunts another man for 3 years?" she asked, needing to know who she was tying her fate to. "The kind of man who has nothing left to lose," Nathan answered quietly. He looked from her to the baby, and his expression shifted. At least that's what I thought, until I found you in the snow. The spring thaw felt like a new beginning. The snow melted, revealing the first hints of green. The world came back to life. Priscilla stayed. She and Nathan didn't speak of Preston Turner again, but his name was a ghost that lived in the cabin with them. They built a routine, a fragile domesticity on a foundation of shared trauma. She cooked and cleaned, turning the bachelor's cabin into a home. He worked his horses, his hands gentle with the animals, in a way that belied the hardness in his eyes. They were two planets orbiting the same small sun. Grace. For Nathan, the baby was a balm on a wound that would never heal. He would spend hours just watching her sleep, a look of profound sorrow and fierce protectiveness on his face. For Priscilla, watching him with her daughter stirred something deep inside her. He was the father Preston never was, and never could be. One day he came back from town with a bolt of blue calico fabric. "Saw it in the mercantile," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Thought it might make a nice dress. The color, it matches your eyes." It was the first truly gentle thing he had done, a gesture that wasn't about protection or shared grief. It was just for her. That night the tension between them shifted. It wasn't fear or sorrow anymore. It was something else, something warmer. "I should think about leaving," she said, the words feeling like a lie even as she spoke them. "I've been a burden for too long." "You're not a burden," he said, setting aside the book he was reading. He looked at her, his expression raw and vulnerable. "Don't go, Priscilla." The plea hung in the air between them. "People will talk," she whispered. "A woman, living with a man, with a child that isn't his." "Then let's give them something real to talk about," he said, his voice low. He knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. They were rough, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly soft. "Marry me, Priscilla." Her heart stopped. This wasn't happening. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice shaking. "This isn't your responsibility." "This isn't about responsibility," he said fiercely. "This is about... This cabin hasn't felt like a home since I lost my family, until you and Grace filled it. You brought the light back in." He looked at her, and she saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering his broken heart, hoping she could help him mend it. "I love Grace as if she were my own," he continued. "I would be proud to give her my name, to be her father." He hesitated. "And maybe, in time, you could learn to care for me." Learn to care for him? The answer was so clear, it terrified her. "I already do," she confessed, the words tumbling out. "I think I started falling in love with you that first night, when you wrapped me in your coat and told me you had me." A smile touched Nathan's lips, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his face. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of wild passion, but of quiet homecoming, a promise of safety, a vow of shared futures. The next Sunday they rode into Bison Creek. Priscilla wore a new dress made from the blue calico. Nathan wore his only good shirt. Grace was wrapped in a white blanket in her mother's arms. They were married by the town preacher in a small, quiet ceremony. As they stepped out of the church, Priscilla saw the innkeeper's wife staring from across the street, her mouth agape in shock. Priscilla stood taller, her hand on Nathan's arm. She was no longer Priscilla Turner, the fallen woman. She was Mrs. Porter, and she was finally home. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that their peace was borrowed. Preston Turner was still out there, and one day the devil would come to collect his due. Summer settled over the valley. Life was good, deceptively good. Nathan's horse business was thriving. He was a different man, the hard edges of his grief softened by happiness. He smiled, he laughed. Priscilla planted a garden. The cabin grew, Nathan adding a new room for Grace with his own hands. Their life was a quiet, happy song. But in the silences, Priscilla could still hear the discordant note of fear. Every strange rider on the horizon made her heart leap into her throat. Every unexpected knock on the door made her reach for the rifle Nathan had taught her to use. One sweltering afternoon in July, the fear rode into their yard. The man was a stranger, his horse lathered with sweat. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Name's James Whitaker, Pinkerton agent." Priscilla stood on the porch, Grace on her hip, her blood turning to ice. "I'm tracking a fugitive," the agent said. "A real nasty piece of work. Leader of a gang that's been hitting banks and stagecoaches from Missouri to Colorado. Goes by the name Edmund." He paused, looking at her intently. Edmund Turner. Priscilla felt the world tilt on its axis. Edmund, not Preston. She swallowed hard. "My maiden name was Turner, sir, but I don't know any Edmund." "Just a coincidence, then," Whitaker said, though his eyes suggested he didn't believe in coincidences. "Heard your husband raises the best horse flesh in the territory. A gang like Turner's needs good horses. Thought he might have seen or heard something." Just then, Nathan rode in. He saw the stranger, the Pinkerton badge, and Priscilla's pale face, and was by her side in an instant. Whitaker repeated his story. As he spoke, a new, terrible thought crept into Priscilla's mind. Preston, Edmund. What if they were the same man, using different names for his different crimes? "Haven't seen anyone suspicious," Nathan said, his voice hard and flat. "But I'll keep an eye out." The agent tipped his hat again and rode away, but the peace of their homestead was shattered. That night, Priscilla told Nathan the truth she had been hiding. Not just that Preston had abandoned her, but that he was a con man, a gambler, a man who preyed on women and disappeared. "I was ashamed," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "Ashamed I was so foolish." Nathan held her. "There is nothing you could ever tell me that would make me love you less," he said. "We're in this together." But the agent's visit was a stone thrown into a quiet pond, and the ripples of fear spread wider every day. A month later, Whitaker returned. "Turner's gang hit a stagecoach near Casper," he said, his face grim. "3 men dead. They're getting bolder, and we have a new report. Someone matching Turner's description was seen asking about a woman and a baby in Laramie." Priscilla felt sick. He was looking for her, for Grace. "We need to leave," she said to Nathan that night, her voice frantic. "We need to run." "No," Nathan said, his jaw set. "This is our home. I ran from him once when he left me for dead. I'm not running again." His hunt was no longer about a ghost of a memory. It was about protecting his new family. He hired a young ranch hand named Eli, a boy who was fast with a horse, and he bought another rifle. The summer heat gave way to the crisp chill of autumn. Then, one afternoon, when Nathan and Eli were miles away delivering horses, Priscilla saw him. A lone rider approaching from the east. There was a familiarity in the way he sat his horse, a confident arrogance that made her blood freeze. She grabbed Grace and ran inside, her hand shaking as she latched the door. The rider dismounted. He walked to the porch. He stopped, and a voice she had prayed she would never hear again cut through the quiet afternoon. "Hello, Priscilla," Preston Turner said. "You're a hard woman to find." He looked different, thinner. A new scar cut a white line across his jaw. But the eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, empty. "What do you want?" she said through the closed door, her voice shaking. "Is that any way to greet the father of your child?" he mocked. His gaze fell on Grace, who was hiding behind Priscilla's skirts. "That's her, isn't it? My daughter." "She's my daughter," Priscilla spat back. You gave up any right to her when you left. I made a mistake, he said, his voice turning smooth as silk. I've come back for you, Priscilla, for both of you, to make us a family again. He wanted to take them away from this, from her home, from Nathan. I'm married, she said, lifting her chin. My husband will be back any minute. A flicker of something dangerous flashed in Preston's eyes. The horse breeder, I heard, quite the little life you've built. But it's all a lie, isn't it? Does he know his precious wife had a child with a wanted man? A murderer? Fear warred with fury inside her. Leave, she said. Now. He laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. I don't think so. I think it's time for a family reunion. He stepped toward the door. Priscilla scrambled backward, pulling Grace with her. She grabbed the rifle from its place over the mantel. Her hands fumbled with the cartridges, Nathan's lessons echoing in her head. Aim steady. Don't hesitate. Open the door, Priscilla. Preston's voice was hard now, the charming mask gone. She raised the rifle, the heavy stock pressed against her shoulder. Just as the doorknob began to turn, she heard it, the sound of approaching horses. Fast. Preston cursed from the other side of the door. This isn't over, he hissed. I'll be back for what's mine. She ran to the window and watched him leap onto his horse and disappear into the trees, just as Nathan and Eli galloped into the yard. Nathan burst through the door, his face a mask of panic. He saw her with the rifle, her face pale, and swept her and Grace into his arms. When she told him what happened, his face became a thundercloud. That's it, he said. We're not waiting for him to come back. He didn't mean running. He meant fighting. He sent Eli for the sheriff and the Pinkerton agent, Whitaker. Then he started boarding up the windows. Their home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a fortress. The sheriff formed a posse. Whitaker had a grim look of satisfaction on his face. He's cornered himself, the agent said. He's obsessed with the child. He won't go far. They were right. The next day, one of the posse members was found dead on the road to town. Shot in the back. A warning. Preston wasn't alone. His gang was out there, in the hills, watching. The homestead was under siege. For 2 days they lived in a state of high alert. Nathan, Eli, and 2 deputies from town stood watch in shifts. No one slept. The nights were the worst. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sounded like an approaching killer. On the 3rd night, Whitaker rode back out from town. I have an idea, he said to Nathan, his voice low. Turner thinks he's smart. We can use that. We can set a trap. The plan was simple and terrifying. They would make it look like Nathan and the deputies were riding for town, leaving Priscilla, Eli, and the baby seemingly unprotected. It was bait. It's too dangerous, Nathan argued, his face tight with anger. It's the only way, Whitaker insisted. He'll get sloppy. He wants the girl. He'll make his move. Priscilla, listening from the doorway, made the decision. Do it, she said. Nathan looked at her, his eyes filled with fear. He underestimates me, she said, her voice steady. That will be his mistake. The next morning, they played their parts. Nathan and the deputies rode out, making a show of heading for town. Then they circled back, hiding their horses in a dense grove of aspens a half-mile from the cabin. Whitaker was with them. Priscilla and Eli waited. The silence was deafening. Hours passed. The sun began to set, painting the sky in bloody shades of red and orange. Then they saw them. 3 riders emerging from the trees. It was Preston and 2 of his men. Eli raised his rifle. Not yet, Priscilla whispered. Let them get closer. They dismounted and crept toward the cabin, moving like wolves. They thought she was a helpless woman, alone and terrified. She was terrified, but she was not helpless. When they were 50 yards from the porch, she gave the signal. She lit the lamp in the front window. The crack of Nathan's rifle from the trees was the first sound. One of Preston's men fell. The second man returned fire, and the yard erupted into a gunfight. Preston ignored it. He ran for the house. He kicked in the door, his pistol drawn, a wild look in his eyes. He saw Eli crouched by the far window and fired. Eli cried out, clutching his shoulder. Preston turned, a triumphant sneer on his face, looking for Priscilla and the baby. The main room was empty. "Priscilla!" he roared. "Come out! It's over!" He took a step toward the bedroom. And that's when Priscilla emerged from the root cellar trapdoor, hidden under a rug in the middle of the floor. She held Nathan's shotgun, and it was aimed right at his heart. Preston froze. He stared at her, then at the shotgun, and he laughed. "You won't do it," he said. "You don't have the stomach for it." "This isn't for me," she said, her voice ice cold. "It's for the woman and the little boy you murdered. It's for my husband, whose life you destroyed. And it's for my daughter, who you will never, ever touch." Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Preston's smile faltered. He was trapped. "We could have had it all, Priscilla," he said, trying his old tricks, his voice turning smooth again. "Money, a life you can't even dream of." "I'm already living my dream," she said. Then a new figure appeared in the shattered doorway. It was the Pinkerton agent, Whitaker. His gun was drawn, but it wasn't pointed at Preston. It was pointed at Priscilla. "Put the shotgun down, Mrs. Porter," Whitaker said, his voice calm. Priscilla stared at him, confused. Nathan and the deputies should have been right behind him. Where were they? "What is this?" she demanded. Preston started to laugh again, a genuine chilling sound. "You didn't think this was all about you, did you, darling? Whitaker here doesn't care about justice. He cares about the $30,000 in payroll gold my gang took from that bank in Colorado." The trap wasn't for Preston. It was for Nathan. Whitaker was a crooked agent. He'd been hunting the money, not the man. He'd used Nathan's grief, used their family, to corner Preston so he could get his cut. He must have disabled Nathan and the deputies somehow. "The gold is long gone, you fool," Preston sneered at the agent. "Then I guess I'll just have to settle for the bounty on your head," Whitaker said. "And the satisfaction of cleaning up this whole messy business." He was going to kill them both. And the child. No witnesses. "Drop it, Priscilla," Preston snapped at her. "He'll shoot you." She was caught between two monsters, a killer and a corrupt lawman. She made her choice. She kept the shotgun aimed squarely at Preston Turner. "If he shoots me," she said to her former lover, "you die a second later." A standoff. The air was thick with hate and gunpowder. Grace started to cry from the bedroom. The sound broke the spell. Preston glanced toward the bedroom just for a second. An instinct. His child. It was the only opening she would get. She didn't fire the shotgun. She swung the heavy barrel with all her might, smashing it into Preston's gun hand. He roared in pain as his pistol clattered to the floor. At the exact same moment, the back door of the cabin burst open. It was Nathan. His face was bloody, but he was on his feet, and he held a hunting knife. One of the deputies was right behind him, also bruised but moving. Whitaker spun around, surprised. He fired his pistol. But Nathan was already moving, tackling the agent, driving him to the floor. They rolled, a desperate struggle of fists and curses. Priscilla didn't watch. She kept her eyes on Preston. He clutched his broken hand, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He looked at her, at the woman he had abandoned, the woman he thought was weak. And for the first time, he looked afraid. He turned and lunged for the broken front door. He never made it. The shotgun blast was deafening in the small cabin. Preston Turner was thrown backward, his reign of terror ending on the floor of the home he had tried to destroy. Priscilla stood over him, smoke curling from the barrels, her face set like stone. The fight was over. Nathan had Whitaker pinned, the deputy covering him. Eli was wounded, but alive. Grace was crying, but safe. Priscilla lowered the shotgun, her body trembling with adrenaline and release. She had not been a victim. She had not waited to be rescued. She had saved her family. Nathan looked across the ruined room at his wife, her face smudged with soot, her eyes blazing with a strength he had never seen. He had found her in a blizzard, a broken woman freezing to death. But in the fire of this fight, she had been forged into something new, something unbreakable. As the deputy hauled the corrupt Pinkerton agent to his feet, Nathan walked to Priscilla and gently took the shotgun from her hands. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight. "I've got you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I know," she replied, leaning into him. "Let's go home." They were already there. The years that followed were quiet. The territory slowly forgot the siege at the Porter homestead. The story faded into legend. Whitaker was sent to a federal prison. The rest of the Turner gang was rounded up. The cabin was rebuilt, stronger than before. They had another child, a son they named Nicholas. Grace grew up bright and fearless, with her mother's grit and Nathan's quiet strength. She never knew the full story of the man who was her biological father, only that her real father was the one who taught her to ride horses and read books by the fire. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm. The seasons turned. The children grew. The love between Nathan and Priscilla deepened, a bond forged in snow and tempered in fire. One cool autumn evening, years later, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. The kids were playing in the yard, their laughter echoing in the twilight. "Do you ever think about it?" Priscilla asked softly. "That night, the blizzard." Nathan took her hand. "I think about how I almost rode right past," he said. "How 1 minute later, 1 minute earlier, and my whole life would have been empty." "It wasn't chance," she said. I think our family was meant to be, that all that pain we went through, it was just the path to get us here, to each other." He looked at her, his wife, the mother of his children, the woman who had faced down monsters to protect their home. "I wake up every morning," he said, "and I thank God for that storm." She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the first stars appear in the vast Wyoming sky. The world was huge and sometimes dangerous, but here, in this small circle of light and love, they were safe, they were whole, they were home. If you enjoyed this story of survival and justice in the Old West, be sure to hit that subscribe button. You never know what strange, dark, and mysterious tales are waiting just around the corner.